कुंजर मणि न्यौपाने पहाडमा पूर्व 2 नम्बर मन्थली रामेछाप जिल्ला को भालुवा जोर भन्ने पहाडमा म जन्मेको 84 वर्ष अघि।
नेपालमा चाहिँ अहिले को हुनुहुन्छ?
नेपालमा चाहिँ नि मेरो दिदीको परिवार, दाजुको परिवार, अनि म चाहिँ सबभन्दा कान्छो। अब तर म 84 वर्ष बुढो भइसकेँ। अब म चाहिँ सबभन्दा जेठो भनौँ न। त्यस कारणले बर्दियामा पनि परिवार छ, मेरो काकाको परिवार त्यो गाउँमा
सम्झना
आइरहन्छ। म हरेक वर्ष जाने विचार थियो, तर यो कोभिड-19ले गरिकन चाहिँ नि 2 वर्षसम्म गएको छैन।
I divided the interview like in 4 parts.
Nepali community is a very small community. It is increasingly becoming important. So we don't have Nepalis, the what do you call the critical mass as such to make a real impact on the politics of Canada. Locally, yes, I should tell you that there was a number of Nepalis that in the GTA that were that contested election to be local leaders, mayor or city councilman. You may have heard some of the names, and they are still around. In fact, on a personal note, my own son became a Conservative Party candidate, during the Harper government time and the Trinity Spadina riding. He has his basic political leaning was a conservative leaning, and they asked him, and my son was born here in Toronto, and since my wife is American, so he's actually a dual citizen because of that reason, and so he's involved in terms of understanding and participating in politics much more than I am. My interest was more academic, business, professional, rather than political. Now, because you are in a democracy where every person is supposed to participate and vote, which I have done, and therefore, there is a natural interest in politics as to what happens, but I'm not particularly political in terms of my activities. How the community is going. Politics 101 says that it is critical that the community becomes somewhat political in terms of participation in the process, and particularly in a democracy. And so we have to first build a critical mass. We have to then also participate in activities, right? And once we do that, then we can make a demand on the system and society and the government to fulfill our demands, needs. It is related to helping Nepal, or whether it is related to helping the community right here, but that is the politics. I don't think the Nepalis are yet up to that point. They are very intelligent people because, they're educated. You have to be somewhat educated in order to migrate here anyway. That's number one. And the Nepalis are well liked by the Canadians because of its reputation, as being straightforward, as being brave, the Gurkhas, all of that helps in our community. They have to become much more involved, join one party or the other, whether you are a liberal or conservative or an NDP or, for that matter, green. Those are the four variations. Unless you live in Quebec, then you got the Bloc Québécois. So we have to join the party. We have to become much more involved in politics, and because we now have a number of associations, there is a little bit of interest and effort on the part of the different associations to get involved in politics and to get the politicians and the leaders of the Canadian different levels of government, whether it is local or provincial or federal, to get them to come and listen to our needs, because our community, domestically or within Canada, we need help, in terms of education, in terms of jobs, in terms of the discrimination that might happen in different areas, and so the demands, we have to make a demand on the society. That means the people that are holding the levers of power. Because we are a visible community, that means we are not white. A white Nepali Canadian, that is rare to have, would probably blend in a little bit quicker, whereas a non-white, a brown Nepali, which is our standard Nepali color. Actually, the whole concept of having a NRM, I was involved in the pre-formal situation when I was president, as well as a very active member of the ANA, Association of Nepalis in the Americas, which is a much larger Nepali organization, not just America, not just United States. It's called Americas. It included Canada, because I was always from Canada, and it included even South America. At that time, we made a representation to the then prime ministers. Whenever there was an opportunity, they're visiting, and I went in 2003 to London, the preparatory meeting of the where we discussed the concept of setting up an international organization that represents Nepalis abroad, diaspora. Now, when it was established, that was the year 2003, I retired from my formal job on my company called BDO at that time, BDO Dunwoody. And so it was a crossroads in my own lifetime. I knew most of the players at that time. I still know a few. And so the question was, will I have the time, the energy, and the resources to do a good job to serve the Nepali international community? I remained, they made me an advisor for a number of years. I remained an advisor, and I've always given them, my advice. And at one point in time, I was thinking that perhaps I should get involved in a much greater way, but because of the time of my life, I could not devote honestly, the amount of resources that included my personal time and personal resources. That was the reason that I did not become active in NRN movement, globally. In some cases, yes, they are probably divided, and sometimes they might import what happens in Nepal, okay, as opposed to what happens here where they live. But I don't consider Nepali community, whether it's Canada or United States, as a divided community, okay? I think they are, basically whenever I go to a meeting, I get a wonderful reception, and the discussion with my fellow Nepalis, and I think the unity part will become stronger if we have an issue, a critical issue that sort of galvanizes us. Take, for example, when we had this COVID situation came, there were international students here, and the Nepali community, was faced with what to do with them. So we all got united, okay? We all contributed money. I sort of came up with a concept as how we could even multiply our money by getting some tax receipts, etc. So people became a little bit more generous. The embassy looked to us, the ambassador called me and said, "Can you do something?" I said, "Okay, I will do something." Okay, so I said, "Okay, I'm going to put up $10,000 and I want everybody to sort of match it." Okay, and then I connected with a charitable organization that does charitable work in Nepal. If they would give charitable receipts, and that galvanizes a number of business people that also provided the money, or people with remember, the Nepalis are relatively recent immigrants. They are not wealthy, okay? We are not a wealthy community. We are wealthy in terms of our resolve, our determination, our good ideas, etc. But we are not wealthy in terms of money and finance. And so that, I think we're still building. Our, business people are coming up. People are also increasing in stature in the government. I wish, we were a lot more prosperous, but, until some time passes and some people, get there, it just takes a little bit more time.
Let's move to your personal life. John F. Kennedy was assassinated the same year you moved to USA.
I came during the President Kennedy's administration.
Yeah.
I still remember, I was in Denver, Colorado, University of Denver, and a dear friend of mine said, Kennedy was just shot, and I couldn't believe. Very exciting time, because Kennedy was galvanizing the young people around the world. "You like Canada?" I said, "Yes, I do." So Canada, in Toronto, Dalhousie, Canada is much closer to San Francisco than, Kathmandu. So I could not argue with her against that. So we just decided to stay. But, I gradually became more and more involved in the Nepali community. I do not have, you see, my parents died when I was very young. So my attachment to Nepal is, while as a country, my friends were there, my brothers were there, my uncles were there, but parents, You know, parents are the greatest attachment. My parents died when I was very young. So that also probably contributed to my decision to stay. And the, the, the beauty of life in America and Canada, you know, was something that I enjoyed. And so that was really the reason.
How was like people treat in the street and in everyday life, like we people, like brown people at that time?
Well, actually, you know, the 70s is when Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was the prime minister when I came. The father of the current prime minister of Canada. And he was, you know, an internationalist. He welcomed immigrants, he welcomed diversity, he did not have a discriminatory attitude, and you know, he was a French Canadian, right? And the French Canadians think that, you know, they are also being discriminated. As you know, the Canadian politics,
Yes.
Canada has that complication. So I think it was a very welcoming kind of a society at that time. Trudeau opened up the immigration, frankly, coming from you know, what you call third world countries. He was internationalist in his attitude. You know, he was part of the North-South Institute. So I think that's when Lake Bahadur Thapa came as well. Over the years, to answer your question, things had to change as more immigrants from Nepal and India and, you know, and Asia, Vietnam for that matter, came here. The Chinese, there was an adjustment issue, not just for the immigrants, but also for the people that were here, okay? Because, you know, they did not follow exactly the same religion, the same culture, the same customs. So if you are in Canada, and you are from Nepal, we have a different, you know, our dominant religion is Hinduism, or the next would be Buddhism, not Christianity, right? So the religion part also impacts. Adjustment would be better if you had a larger, you know, more substantial community, you know, like the Italians. They adjusted much faster. Or the Germans, okay, they adjusted much faster. Whereas the Nepalese or the Indians, you know, it took them time to adjust. The Indians, basically because there was a lot more Indians, you know, now I'm dividing it. Therefore, you know, they were able to make a demand because the democracy can use the vote. The Indians were able to make a demand on the society and get their demand fulfilled, get the people, get their own representative go into the political system, and you know, they cater to their needs than us. You know, I don't think there is a Nepali member of parliament in Canada yet, right? There is, you know, I mean, my son would have been a member of parliament, and he will only be part Nepali. But you know, they are trying here and there. Not necessarily mean that there was no discrimination. There was, and in fact, one time I remember my wife and I, we lived in a sort of a congested condo community, not condo, yeah, high-rise, St. James Town. You've heard of that. And one time we were coming up and down the elevator, and one of the white tenants of that community, you know, he made some racial remarks, and you know, we ended up on some sort of a little bit of a fight. there was another party there, another passenger. They restrained him because, you know, he was, obviously this person did not like anybody that was not white. So, you know, that was my personal experience, or my wife's personal experience. But I would not say that is the usual part.
Yes.
The Jews were discriminated, you know. If you, at that time I remember listening to CBC radio, and it talks about this Jewish lady who was a medical doctor, but her name was not, you know, could not immediately identified as Jewish. Okay, so they invited her apparently for an interview, and when she went, but her features were more Jewish. Okay, it just happened. So when she was there and they saw her, they asked her a question or two, and then found out that she was Jewish, and then she didn't get the job. You know, they said goodbye to her. I had, you know, I went to different, various job interviews, and initially, because maybe they did not know the name, etc., they invited me, and as soon as they saw me, they said, well, you know, maybe, you know, we'll talk to you later, or maybe you should go to Ottawa, because I have a, you know, I was highly educated in international relations, etc. So I had to, I basically, after that, I said, and I think the question that you're probably going to ask, or you have asked indirectly, I had to basically say that I'm not highly educated. I have, you know, basic education, BCom, you know, bachelor's degree, etc., to get foot in the door, because they will say, you don't have a Canadian experience. Now, how can you get a Canadian experience if you don't get a Canadian job? You know, that is a question that every immigrant has to ask, you know, and that's that. There is no doubt that Canada has improved over the years in terms of making, you know, the immigrants welcome, and the Canadian need for labor, you know, immigrant labor, is there, and yet people don't quite recognize it. And because of the cultural, linguistic, and even, you know, the color differences, it is much harder for people of visible minority, that we call them, to get recognized and accepted. It just will take more time as Canada becomes more and more, you know, populated by immigrants. Our children will be going to school, you know, and working in tandem with the mainstream Canadians, and then the discrimination will gradually disappear. But it is here. In mid-70s to late 70s, half a dozen families, and we gathered together, you know, from each other's home, whether it was Brampton or Mississauga or Scarborough, that kind of a thing. We were very close with each other, but as population grew, then of course there is much more of a variation. But in the beginning, there were 5 families literally. I could name them. Canadian experience, Canadian education, etc., was always brought out as a reason for not giving you the job. It's not your inability to do the job. Now that is where the discrimination the question that you asked, Canada was increasingly becoming more and more, international in terms of its trade. Canada dependent is much more dependent on international trade than, let's say, as a percentage than the United States. So they need people, okay? So you end up ultimately, getting trained, rubbing your shoulder, etc. Retirement is, sometimes, or most of the time, in a legalistic sense, they put a date, okay? Like, I had to retire when I was 65. It was not because I lacked energy. It was not because my mind was slipping. It was because the company that I was working, and I was a partner there, okay? They had a constitution that basically said at the age of 65, you retire, you get a pension for, etc., so that new blood can come. Now that was a justification. Now in my case, what happened was, because I got married late, because we also waited another 12 years to have my first child, it was late. So, my kid was just, getting into the university, and the demand on me as parent to support him, to support myself, to support my family back in Nepal, was there. And I was relatively active in my life in terms of health, so I had no health problem. Okay. And so the enthusiasm came that way, and then I set up a company. I negotiated actually with my previous company that I could do similar work, but not compete with them completely, but the smaller variety of work, consumer work. And by that time, when I was 65, I knew a whole lot of people. I was that's 2003. I was well known in North America and Canada, so I had no problem in terms of setting up a company. I in fact hired a Nepali guy that I knew from back from Nepal, but he immigrated here. I hired him and started. We were about three people, and then the 3 became 5, 5 became 7, 9. Now we've got a couple of dozen people, at least. First, you have to educate yourself, okay? And then that will give you a bit of an interest into the area you want to go. And then secondly, you have to get an opportunity, okay? For example, even my getting a job was actually a referral from a fellow, a Czechoslovakian immigrant that was here, and I met him. He was a photographer, and he was a hiker, a trekker, and so he was showing the film on Nepal, and so I knocked on his door. He was the manager of a store, so I went and talked to him. He said, so he was so happy to see me. He said, "Oh, you are a Nepali." So he was looking for a Nepali because he had a contact in Nepal, a porter, and he wanted to communicate with him, and the porter would not write in English, and he could not write in Nepali. So I became a interpreter, a translator for him. And then he took me to this company that ultimately I became an owner, part owner. Because he knew somebody there who was from his old country, Czechoslovakia, and he said, can you hire this guy? So I got the job, not because I had a PhD. I got the job because somebody said, let's give him an opportunity, and so that's where I had said, I want to have a BCom, I can do some work, etc. Gradually, once you get the foot in the door, then you can show, what you can do, and then discrimination disappears. But getting through in the door, there is discrimination. There is no doubt about that. Basically, I think initially the government of Nepal wanted somebody that can issue visas, to go to Nepal, as well as someone that can represent the country a little bit, into the Nepal initially had honorary council that were not Nepalis, that were foreigners. So they would promote Nepal. So I was the first one as the honorary council that was of Nepali origin. Actually, Girija Babu told me. Girija Prasad Koirala, he was the prime minister. He's the one that during his prime ministership, 1993, he was the prime minister. I became the honorary consul general. So he told me a story. When I went to Nepal that year, when I became the honorary consul general, they invited me. I went as the United Nations Tokten scholar type of a thing too. And he said, Kunjar, when I forwarded your resume and recommended you to become the honorary consul general, the king, the royal palace, at that time we had a monarchy, right? The king said, why him? He's a Nepali. So Girija would send the thing back again to palace, back, saying that who can speak for Nepal better than a Nepali? That was what he said. And in the protocol of Nepal at that time, the palace can send things back a couple of times, but the third time, it's like overriding presidential thing that happens in politics. So ultimately, the royal palace agreed that I could become the honorary consul general of Nepal here in Canada. I was the second one because there was another guy who was not a Nepali, but and his complaint was that he was not getting any benefit out of it. So, and I'm saying that I'm surprised, you become honorary consul, to serve the community, to serve the country for love of that, rather than, personal gain, because it's honorary. That means it's anaupacharik, right? So that's really how it happened. It was very interesting. And so I started giving the visas, but I was promoting Nepal, promoting Nepal with the business community, with the political community, all of that, and that sort of, and I was very active all over America, and my American friends, Nepali American, they helped me, because my contact with Girija Babu was zero, literally. But so some of the people I knew, they knew the Koiralas, They knew the government, other political leaders. So that's how I get. So I basically give credit to the Nepali community here in Canada as well as America for my elevation or for my job as an honorary consul general. Canadians have a wonderful view of Nepal. Okay. I'm talking about Nepali Nepal, you know, I mean, I'm not talking about the people that have migrated here as such, you know, because we're only a few. But Canadians that go to Nepal, that have a great impression of Nepal. I went with a lawyer while I was doing the thing, you know. He took me to a club it is called RCMI, Royal Canadian Military Institute. It's a military club in the sense it was established by you know, a Canadian who was you know, general, etc. But it's not restricted to military people, but you know, it got started. So it has a military history. And I meet a person there who was one of the founders of the club, social club. And his name was Colonel Justice Robert Rutherford. Now he had during World War II alongside with the British Gurkhas. So as soon as he heard that I'm from Nepal, he said, "Oh, wonderful, you know." So he said, "You got to become a member of the club." So I became a member of the club. At that time, you know, my company was well off, so you know, I wrote a check for $800. That was a membership for that year, and they kept on raising it later on. But the point is that was how that the perception of Nepalis as a fighting force, as an honest people, as a country that has the best, you know, the mountain series of peaks, etc., is there in Canada, and it has helped. The RCMP, you know, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Nepali Army, they have had some good relationship, etc. And so at that level, I think the Canadians are much more friendly towards Nepal. Canada is relatively a small country in terms of wealth and total number of population. Okay, now it's a big country in the sense, you know, it is a G7. One of the G7 countries, but it has limited resources, and so it's Nepal does not figure prominent in Canadian you know, concept of spending money, and therefore they have not established an embassy. It's not because they don't like Nepal. Now the way we can change it is if we become more involved, our community becomes much more important politically, you know. We have members of parliament, we have people in the cabinet, etc. Then we can make a demand. We can make a demand on the system, hey, let's open, let's have an embassy. Or if we have an opportunity to increase the trade, you know, between the two countries. Do we have something that Canada really genuinely needs, you know, desperately, you know, like some mineral products, medicinal herbs, etc. Those are the types of things that will impact on the thinking of the leadership. You know, because every country has limited resources, and they try to allocate it accordingly. So Africa makes a demand on Canada, so the Canadians have more, you know, things in some of the African countries, rather than in Nepal. But look at what the Indians did. The Indians insisted, because the population increased here of Indians, so the consulate, the Canadian consulate, not the honorary, the regular consulate of Canada in India, increased from 1 to 3 or 4, okay? Because there was the demand here, and then the trade also increased. But the India-Canada trade is not so huge still. The thing is that when you come to a developed country like Canada, which has a different kinds of financial instruments, you know, marketing instruments like credit cards, you know, ability to get money, payday loans, all of that, that is too enticing for people to get the money and to spend it, okay? Because there are lots of things you can buy, etc., without really thinking in terms of budget. So you have to be able to either an education, financial literacy is critical. Now, the young people that are growing up here, they will learn much quicker than the people that come here, you know, as an immigrant, as a labor people, you know, of different types. And so they're probably going to be getting in trouble because of the fact that the credit is so easily available, and you can spend it. It says, oh, you don't have to pay it now, pay it later. So I would say, as a community, we probably have to do two things. Okay, number one, we have to also create an education of financial literacy for our community, if we can do that. Lots of communities do that. Number two, and you know, the Koreans have done it, you know, they as a community, they say, okay, you know, we as a together, we're going to create either a credit union or some fund that to help you set up a business. Okay. So it's all a growing pains. Okay, as you become more and more sophisticated, learn more and more, get more established, it just takes time. But your question is very important, that Nepalis that come here, particularly the recent immigrants, they do not, that you do not overspend, you know, that even though money is easily available, the credit is easily available, you have to pay. Yes. Ultimately, you know, when you sign it, you have to pay, right? Now, one of the guys that when I first came to Toronto, there was an Indian fellow from actually he was Indian, but he was from Africa, and we were talking about this business, etc. So he said, we in India, we Indians, he was telling the community that gathered there, prana jaya par bachana na jaya. That means, you know, I'd rather, you know, my word is so important that, you know, I die for to keep my word. Nepalis are the same way. But just by saying that does not make it, okay? You have to behave, you have to understand. So I think it is a learning process. I think I'm happy by and large of the Nepali community here. I think sometimes we have a division, and that basically reflects, you know, what is happening back in Nepal, you know, when we have a fight, you know, political
on the basis of politics.
Division that sort of gets reflected here. But don't forget, we are Canadians also, in the sense that our values are set up under the Canadian Constitution, and it is a wonderful country to live. I'm so thankful that I decided to stay in Canada because that includes my wife. She is American by birth, and yet she likes Canada. She says she's so grateful that we are here, and so I really want our community to grow. I would like to help them as much as I can, and I've been helping a little bit. I'm helping, the whole country as well, but perhaps I could do more.